She'd had such an awful day. She'd missed her alarm, which meant she'd been late for work. She'd forgotten certain documents she'd needed for a meeting. She'd been yelled at so fiercely by a superior that she'd been frightened. She thought her heart might burst from her chest. Even worse, she'd had to stay overtime to complete whatever it was her superior wanted. Stressed out, burnt out at last, she'd simply fled her workplace, stopping at her shabby apartment to doff her clothing and anything else that might make her appear civilized, flinging it away before outright fleeing to the human sector, the one place her people had forbidden her to go. "Never go there," her elders had told her. "The humans will make you their pet. You'll never want to leave." The Ypernian sobbed, even as she laughed, throwing herself through the cat flap built into the human's door. Her elders had lied. Humans didn't make you their pets. You became a human's pet, and the humans usually accepted you with open arms. Drenched from rain, Zeely bolted into the den or living room of her human's place, and found him in his usual place, sitting in that comfy chair by the warm fire. Body quivering, she whimpered, looked up at him. Then when he tapped his knee, she leapt up into his lap, placed her handpaws on his chest, and then she burst into tears. Translator off so no one could hear or understand her, as her human held her close and rocked her, poor Zeely vented about her day, how everything had gone so wrong until she couldn't talk any more. Her human rocked and petted and stroked and soothed her. In his lap, wrapped up in his arms, red and white fur drying from the fire's warmth, Zeely Navita wept, whimpered like a kit. Gods, she adored him so much. His hands, stroking her ears, roaming through her fluffy red and white fur, soothed away her stress. She felt her frantic heart slow and gradually synchronize with his as she began to drift off to sleep. Holding carefully to his charge, as Marcus Devon carefully extinguished the fire, then locked up the house before bed, he kissed little Zeely on the top of her head, drawing a trill from her. Making his way into his bedroom, he set Zeely atop his bed, doffed his bathrobe for a nightshirt, and then settled into bed, pausing only to draw Zeely to him. With a woof, she settled near him, cuddling into him, head under his chin. Then he pulled the duvet over them both, so only her snout tip poked out. As he kept petting her gently, she heaved a relaxed sigh, settling into deeper sleep. The next day, when Zeely woke early, gave her Marcus a goodbye lick, and padded sadly from his house, smartly dressed in a spare business suit she kept at his place for times like this, she expected to be apprehended by the human sector guard, or even worse, the stiff tails from Ypernian rehabilitation. Instead, as she brusquely marched through the gates, to her surprise, one of the gate guards nodded to her, raising a claw to barely pull down the collar of his uniform, revealing the barest hint of the collar around his neck. He'd been taken by a human, too. Zeely's eyes widened for a moment. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, a slight upturning of the lips in a toothless smile, as the gate guard glared at her, then stomped his feet and returned to his duties. She merged with other Ypernians as she made her way to her apartment to pick up her briefcase, this time checking to ensure she had the correct documents within. Being a menial in a company run by patriarchs, for her, work was the same as always. Endless meetings, orders coming in, products going out, management up her tail just because of one blasted mistake on a form typed up by some other menial employee. There were times when she wanted to bark so badly at her male superiors. Times when she wanted to rip her head fur out in frustration. Times when she sat on the toilet and cried her eyes out. Her human, only the thought of spending time with her human kept her going. At last, the day ended. Office tidy, she fled from her job, doffed her clothing at her apartment, then made her way to her human's house. To her surprise, Marcus was at the door and she went rigid, tail nearly flying off. She was wagging it so hard when she espied the leash in his hand. No sooner had he clipped it to her collar than they were going walkies, tiny, joyous whimpers escaping her as she trotted proudly to heel beside him. To her delight, Marcus took her to a park in the human sector, wherein she spied humans relaxing, picnicking, and playing with her people. Her eyes nearly popped from her head as she saw, there, children playing simple tag and race with Ypernian kits. And there, a male Ypernian with a human female. He was embracing her as she stroked down his back soothingly. Over there, and here she blushed. A female like herself, with thick plush fur on her back, eyes closed and tongue lolling as a human rubbed her chest and belly, her leg kicking in the air. Then confusion filled her, even as Marcus sat on a bench and started to pet and stroke her all over, because she saw fearsome warlike Canatians letting children ride on their backs, or with their heads in human laps as they were petted and soothed into bliss. By far, the most amazing sight was the slip of a human female, who, it seemed, had near total submission of a colossal Wolverian who'd fought in some awful war, his body more prosthetic than living flesh. The human didn't seem to care about his appearance. She softly stroked his head and ears as he looked up at her, his remaining eye filled with love and tears as she softly sung to him, "This looks familiar / vaguely familiar / almost unreal yet / it's too soon to feel yet / close to my soul / and yet so far away / I'm going to go back there / someday." Zeeley's own eyes suddenly went very misty as this fearsome, terrifying beast broke character then. A hissing noise from an artificial lung, and then "F-m-lee," he stuttered, struggling to speak. His human soothed him, calmed him. "We'll find them. We're getting closer every day," she said. But the giant shook his head, chuffed laughter, then struggled again. "No, you, Sarah, F-m-lee." The great Wolverian embraced her then. Zeeley heard as he tried to explain to Sarah why he'd decided this, that she'd never loathed him for his appearance, or mocked his PTSD, or slow speech due to his stroke. Of days when she'd helped him by delivering groceries and doing odd jobs about his house, when he'd been in so much pain from his prosthetics he couldn't move. But he devolved into a stumbling, stuttering mess as his beloved little human kissed his nose, and then he cried. He hadn't needed to explain anything, because she already knew. That night, after their lovely evening at the park, Zeeley slipped home once Marcus was asleep. Calf in paw, she went to her computer. It was top of the line. It was top of the line, about 10 years ago. Zeeley sighed, a bit despondent. It was nothing like her Marcus's super-powered machine, but she could still access the internet, so that's what she did. Wanting to put something to bed, as it were, she typed into the Woofle search engine, "Ypernion's human pets." And then she thumped her head against her desk, repeatedly as all was made clear. Then she laughed, she cried, she laughed again. Ypernians and other aliens being the pets of humans was a best-kept secret, which meant, of course, that everyone who was everyone knew about it. There was nothing bad about it, per se, but at the same time it was sort of frowned upon. If you were caught au naturel with a human in the human sector, then you would be quietly shuffled off to Ypernian rehabilitation. Zeeley poked about and found that at first the place wasn't so bad. Playrooms, soft toys, breed mothers with teats full of milk. In that place you could de-stress, and it was a chance to be a kid again, at least for a little while. But soon, Zeeley's muzzle wrinkled in a frown. A new rehabilitation director had moved in. And then, as the humans would say, everything had gone straight to hell. Zeeley read and read and read, her expression turning grim even as her eyes widened with heightened fear. This can't be true, she thought, horrified, but the rumours, hearsay and conspiracy theories were laid bare before her eyes. Cruel hypnotherapy, mental reconditioning, visual and auditory horror, psychological programming and more, all in an effort to rehabilitate a Ypernian into believing that it was uncivilized and wrong to be the pet of a human, that humans were horrifying and utterly repulsive. No, 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 Nan! Bile filling her throat, Zeeley raced to the toilet in time to throw up her dinner and what little calf she'd drunk down, hastily washing her mouth out, stress levels through the roof. She openly cried as she threw off her nightgown to be au naturel again, the way her Marcus had always seen her. Racing from her apartment, as if rehabilitation officers were chasing her, she fled for her life back to the human sector. The guards in the know barely got the gates open before she ripped up the right street, near smashing the cat flap to pieces as she tore into her human's place and back to her Marcus. Panting, frantic, she raced into his bedroom and then, oof, leapt into his bed, burying herself in beneath the duvet, nuzzling, licking, snuffling. And then she howled as she burst into tears. Later, much later, after Marcus placed a drop of a very mild sedative on her tongue to help calm her, as her poor heart slowed and started to beat in time with his, and he encouraged her to breathe deeply, in through her nose, out through her mouth, Zelie blinked muzzily and said, "Yeah, you know we're sapient, right?" And then horror gripped her guts as she realized she'd broken character. Despair became her world. Marcus would be furious. He would yell at her for lying to him, for pretending to be his pet. He would cast her away from his warm, loving home, away from his touch, from being petted, pampered, talked softly to and soothed, back into a world of sapience, constant work, horrible stress that took the lives of so many too young. He would. Marcus blinked. Yes, of course. All of humanity knows you're all sapient. And? So what? Now Zelie was shocked. But if you know we're all intelligent like you, then why? Why do we go along with it when you want to escape and role-play as our pets? Because, well, to be honest, from what I've seen of your society, you need the escape. And of course it helps that we like petting animals, and aliens that look like animals too. Marcus grinned, and Zelie laughed and laughed, until she was suddenly crying, bawling like a kit, sobbing into the nightshirt he wore, cathartic tears. Marcus held her as she wept, cuddled her, squeezed her gently, kissed the top of her furry head between her ears. And then she cried even harder when he told her how much he loved her, his sweet little fox. Later, much later, as he gently dried the tears from her eyes, Zelie told him of what she'd read about Ypurnian rehabilitation. And as she talked, the human's expression became grim, then went darker and darker. Once she was all talked out, Marcus responded, "Now you listen to me, Zelie. If anyone ever gives you lip about being my pet or gets yip rehab on your tail, you come straight to me, and bring any friends who are human pets too. I have some connections, might be able to get a couple of shuttles worth of you away from here. We can even make it legit for a time, call it an educational field trip or a working holiday or something. By the time Yipgov realizes what's happened, you'll all have asylum on Earth. Mind you, if they get really uppity about it and try to send rehab officers to Earth to bring you all back, well." Zelie followed her human's gaze to the very large double-barreled shotgun he had mounted on the wall above the bed, a near-feral grin splitting her muzzle as he finished. "Someone's going to have a really bad day."